So we've moved inside because it's gone really dark out, just as Chris was reciting the names of Sharada. And what really struck me, Chris, was that she's both joy and anger. She's passion and fear. She's also the mind, anxiety, right? And she's also the giver of all things, all wishes, the grantor of all wishes. And she's forgiveness. She is the bodily feeling of bliss. She's sexual passion. So she's all of these things. I mean, she's both the dark and the light, essentially. She's the embodiment of time. So what's beautiful about this is that in our yoga culture, there seems to be a notion of what it is to be yogic. And that doesn't include anger. It doesn't include jealousy. It doesn't include shame. It doesn't include anything negative or anything dark. But here, as you recite the names of Sharada, we discover that she is everything. So how is that meaningful to the regular yoga practitioner?
I had a very interesting experience that perhaps will shed some light on how the goddess is understood in these tantric traditions, as in the case of Sharada. It came to me as quite a shock, this experience, because when I was a kid, my father, Ron, who's my teacher, my spiritual teacher, had indoctrinated me in all the great classics of India, you know, Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutra, etc., etc. And what I learned initially, or thought I was learning in those texts, beyond the need for the discipline of a daily practice to quell the storms of the mind and all that, and the passions of the body, to come into a place of harmony with them, I got the impression, and I think my father allowed me to get this impression, that a spiritual person, an enlightened being, a Buddha, is somebody that's bereft of sorrow, anger, passion, in the sense of lust, that this sort of person has defeated these emotions. Indeed, this is what you see in the ancient yoga texts. So I went to India and I did not find a guru. I came back with dysentery instead. And I did learn asana, the physical yoga practice, but I had a feeling of deep shame, remorse, guilt, and all of this cultivated a sort of irrational anger towards my father. And I'll never forget the day. 2 months had passed, and I showed up at home, you know, probably 20 pounds less. And the anger, which was simply displaced sadness and low self-worth, was projected, as is done by unconscious people, towards a target called the trigger. And that was my father. But there he was meditating, and the rule of the house since I was a little kid was you don't bother Dad when he's meditating. So I sat next to him, and at this point, the anger was literally like splitting into new plans as I was sitting there. Okay, well, I'll prove to him that I've become a good yogi. I don't need a guru. I'm fine. I'm going to look sick, but when he looks at me, he'll come out of his meditation to see me doing badass pranayama. So I started going to work, doing the slow breath work he had taught me, and ascending various seed mantras the way I was taught to do. And as I did so, the shame of unworthiness built, and I noticed that it was centered in my navel. And as it built, the anger sort of had nowhere to go. I mean, the peace coming off this man was incredible, and he was seated on my left. I slowly realized, as I began to feel a sensation, if you can even describe it, perhaps a feeling of an intense orgasm, but not sexual, and that's probably hard for us to imagine. It's indescribable, but it was a feeling of perfect peace and bliss and rapture shot straight up my spine, and it came back down again. And I realized all the while that the source, the battery, if you will, was the anger towards my father that had been cultivated as the expression of low self-worth. And I simply let my body, my subtle body, take over. And I realized at that moment there's a subtle intelligence that the Tantras call the goddess, Shakti, that knows what to do. And it works with emotions like anger. And sure enough, as the feelings started to really explode, I was suddenly aware of the nadi system, for example, that was in all the texts. And in this brief little glimpse at the light within all of us, I realized of course, that my father is in the same state sitting next to me. And when I opened my eyes, he was seated before me. And shocked, awed, humbled, and mentally quiet, I looked up at him and he said, "Now you're ready."
That's amazing. So basically what you did is you took the fire of anger and you transmuted it into bliss in your own being.
It transmuted itself into bliss, and I was a lucky witness. I did not yet know at the time that the term for this, this very, very personal feeling of emotion is Shakti. Shakti means energy. It doesn't mean a particular kind of energy only, you see. And so this totally shifted my perspective on what it means to be a spiritual being and to be in a body in a state of acceptance and yet to be able to utilize the tools of what's brought before us.
Basically what it sounds like is that the emotion, the wave, and our ability to ride it is a part of our path on enlightenment.
If you know what to do with it. It's easy to become unconscious. But I will swear to my dying day, and this was my direct experience, that anger was the source of the moment of awakening there. The little glimpse at the light that my father gradually came to dwell in before he left his body. That anger, had it not been there, I would not have had a glimpse at what I would say is the desire of all souls to experience the light of the self. So we have to think about Shakti in terms from our classical understanding of yoga, which is really coming from pre-tantric sources, and begin to realize that these people, these tantrics, were into a radically life-affirming practice that wasn't just philosophical, it was practical. Mm-hmm. And they developed a whole mantra pranayama system to deal with these, what they called goddesses of your emotions, which we see listed as the names of Sharada, for example.
So why does she need 1,000 names?
I can't believe there's only 1,000. I mean, it's a good round number.
So the 1,000 names are not exactly 1,000 ways to praise her. What they sound like is that they're the 1,000 ways in which she is manifested in our lives.
As you, and this is where the non-duality comes into being. As I make an offering into the fire, as I recite in this ritual the name of Sharada that I'm on, you are literally making an offering to that goddess, let us say the thunderous power of anger that's within all of us. You're making an offering to that goddess as she's reflected here in the fire of the heart lotus, the heart altar. So this outer ritual is symbolic of a transformation that begins with acceptance. This feeling I have now is not spiritual or unspiritual. It is the goddess as she is manifesting. When I bow to her, I do two things. I stop pushing her away. And secondly, I begin at a more advanced, slightly more advanced stage to utilize the energy of that emotion to transform this beautiful temple, the body as the tantrics call it, into a playground of bliss, literally to experience the enlightened state. But inevitably, if I'm in a body, I'm going to experience bodily emotions that are not so pleasant. There's going to be anger that's triggered, sadness is that triggered. The first step is to say, the trigger is incidental to this practice. This person may have said the angry words and known how to piss me off, but this anger, let us say, or this sadness is mine. But what we are in the habit of doing is to say, this isn't spiritual for me to be angry. Instead, this tradition, if you forgive the image, if we imagine the goddess perhaps appearing before us as that emotion, what would she look like? What would the joy you feel when you look at your child or your puppy or your lover? What would that look like if she was a goddess? Lovely, right? Some beautiful image. Perhaps the face of that person or puppy themselves. That's fine. And I want to offer lots of flowers. Please stay. I'm devoted to you. But then, of course, inevitably the other ones come, and they have fangs and claws, like Monty Python's sketch with the rabbit, big, sharp, pointy teeth and claws. The last thing we want to do is to give her flowers. So what do we say? I shouldn't be feeling anger. I'm a yogi. Push this away. Well, this goddess wants flowers too. That's to say, you cannot gain on the spiritual path if you are denying what the goddess is putting before you to grow. And it might be that anger in that moment.
So bow to the trigger.
Bowing to the trigger, but utilizing what is triggered. So instead, I offer flowers. Anger, you are before me. You're ugly as hell. My inner child or my ego doesn't want you there. But how can I learn from you? When you give flowers, already she begins to change. Her countenance becomes a higher bliss, and this is the Ma Shakti, the source of all bliss that Sharada represents, underlying these temporal phases of her own expression, like waves on the ocean. Suddenly, by saying, I have this feeling, I honor you, it begins to break up. But it's still there. Now, we're given the practice in the Sahasranama of transforming consciously that energy, that emotion, into a catalyst of Kundalini Shakti, the liberating power.